Chosen one, pay attention. They told you the argument never happened. They told you your memory was wrong, that you were too sensitive, too dramatic, too much. They said it so many times that you started rehearsing their version instead of trusting your own eyes. And last night, chosen one, the same lies they used to keep you quiet started talking back to them, out loud, in front of everyone who ever believed their story. You know the pattern already. You lived it. The small corrections that turned into big rewrites. "That's not what I said," when you both knew exactly what was said. The way they'd tilt their head and smile while they erased your reality in real time, and everyone around you just nodded along because it was easier than questioning someone who sounded so sure of themselves. You weren't confused. You were being managed, and you knew it, even when you couldn't prove it, even when you started doubting the thing you were surest of, which was the truth. Here's what they never planned for. Lies need maintenance. A true story doesn't need to be rebuilt every time someone asks a follow-up question. But a lie needs constant repair, constant new coats of paint, constant new versions to cover the cracks in the old ones. And the more lies a person tells to stay in control, the more versions they have to remember, and the harder it gets to keep them straight. You didn't do anything to them. You just stayed quiet long enough to watch the versions stop matching. That's the part unfolding right now. Not because you finally snapped, not because you finally screamed the truth into a microphone, but because the story they built to survive is now too heavy for them to carry. Every gaslight, every twisted memory, every "you're overreacting," every "I never said that," it's still sitting there, word for word, and it's starting to collide with itself in front of the very people they were trying to fool. Before we go further, if this is already landing somewhere real in you, hit like and subscribe. Not for luck, not for some superstition, just as your way of feeding this back into the algorithm so the next chosen one finds this exact message when they need it most. That's the whole point of this channel. One story reaching the next person at the right moment. Now let's keep going, because the real unraveling hasn't even started yet. You spent years being told the version of events that made you the problem. You spent years apologizing for things you didn't do, softening opinions you knew were right, second-guessing feelings that were completely valid, all because someone convinced you that your perception couldn't be trusted. That is not a small thing. That is a slow, quiet kind of damage, and it doesn't leave bruises anyone else can see. It leaves something worse. It leaves you standing in your own life, asking yourself, did that really happen, or am I making it up? But here's what they underestimated. You kept receipts they didn't know about. Not screenshots, not recordings, something harder to erase. You kept the feeling. You kept the exact moment your stomach dropped when they said something that didn't match what happened 5 minutes earlier. You kept the pattern, even when you couldn't name it yet. And a pattern, once it's been felt enough times, doesn't disappear just because someone tells you it's not real. It waits. It waits for the day the outside world finally catches up to what you already knew on the inside. That day is here. Chosen ones, if you can feel that shift starting to move in your chest right now, drop a 77 in the comments. Let this message know you're still here, still watching, still ready for what comes next. And if this content has been carrying you through something heavy, consider dropping a super thanks. It keeps these messages coming for the next person who needs to hear exactly this, at exactly the right moment. Let's break this down, piece by piece, because what's happening to them right now didn't come from revenge. It came from something much bigger than that. Number 1. The lie they used to control your mind is now the thing controlling their downfall. For years, they had one job when it came to you. Keep the story confusing enough that you'd never trust yourself to challenge it. That's what gaslighting actually is, underneath all the soft language people use to describe it. It's not an argument. It's not a misunderstanding. It's a strategy. A quiet, repeated strategy to make you doubt your own senses so thoroughly that you stop checking their behavior against reality altogether. And it worked. For a while. You apologized for things that weren't your fault. You second-guessed conversations you remembered clearly. You started asking other people to confirm things you already knew, just to feel sane again. Here's the part they never accounted for. A lie only survives as long as nobody compares notes. And people are comparing notes now. Somewhere, in a conversation you weren't even part of, someone repeated their version of a story, and it didn't match the version they told someone else last year. Someone caught the gap. Someone asked a follow-up question they weren't ready for. And once one thread gets pulled, the rest of the fabric doesn't hold. That's not karma showing up like lightning from the sky. That's math. That's the simple, unforgiving math of a person who told too many different versions of the same event to too many different people for too many years, and finally ran out of room to keep them separated. Imagine building a house with no foundation, just stacking floor after floor on top of nothing but confidence. For a while it looks impressive. It looks like it's standing strong. But the higher it goes, the more weight it's carrying on nothing. And eventually gravity does what gravity always does. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't wait for the right moment. It just happens, all at once, exactly when the structure can't hold anymore. That's what's happening to them right now, and you didn't have to push a single brick. You might be asking yourself, why now? Why, after all these years, did the story finally start cracking? Because confusion has a shelf life. People can only be told, trust me instead of your own eyes, for so long before something in them starts quietly checking anyway. The friend who always took their side started noticing small inconsistencies. The co-worker who defended them started hearing rumors that didn't add up. The family member who dismissed your concerns started remembering moments they'd conveniently forgotten to mention. None of that happened because you convinced anyone of anything. It happened because the lie ran out of new places to hide. You don't need to say a word right now. You don't need to correct a single person. The version of events you were told to doubt for years is standing back up on its own, exactly the way it always was, exactly the way you remembered it the whole time. There's a reason this particular kind of collapse feels different from an ordinary falling out. An ordinary falling out has two sides that both remember roughly the same events, just interpreted differently. This isn't that. This is the specific, disorienting experience of watching a constructed reality lose its grip on the people who were living inside it, one small correction at a time. That's not how it happened, someone finally says, out loud, to the person who spent years insisting it did. And once that sentence exists in the open, it doesn't go back into the drawer. You don't need to track every domino as it falls. You don't need to be present for every conversation where someone finally connects the dots. The story is doing what true things eventually do when they're given enough time, standing back up on its own, quietly, without needing your permission or your presence to keep happening. Number 2, why they needed you confused to stay in control. Confusion was never an accident with them, it was the entire strategy. A person who is sure of what happened is a person who can hold someone accountable. A person who doubts their own memory is a person who can be managed, redirected, and quietly kept in place. That's the part nobody warns you about when they talk about manipulation like it's just bad communication. It isn't. It's a system, and the system only works as long as you're the only one questioning yourself instead of them. Think about how much energy they spent keeping you off balance. Every time you brought something up calmly, they twisted the timeline just enough that you started defending your own memory instead of discussing the actual issue. Every time you asked a direct question, they answered a different one, and somehow you ended up apologizing anyway. That's not confusion on their part. That's precision. Confused people don't manage a story that well for that long. Only someone protecting something does that. Here's the twist they never saw coming. The same discipline they used to control the narrative around you is now working against them because they can't turn it off. They're still doing it, out of habit, with everyone else, and the people around them are starting to notice the same thing you noticed years before anyone believed you. The tilted head, the confident redirect, the "that's not what happened," delivered with just enough certainty to make people doubt themselves for a second. Except this time, someone else is comparing that story to something they already know is true, and the trick isn't landing the same way. Picture a magician who's been doing the same sleight of hand for years, so smooth, so practiced, that nobody in the audience ever questions it. Then one night, someone in the front row happens to catch the movement in the wrong light, at the wrong angle, and suddenly the trick isn't a trick anymore. It's just a hand moving where it shouldn't. That's what's happening now. The performance hasn't changed. The audience has just gotten close enough to see the seams. You spent years being the only person who could see the seams, and you were told you were the problem for noticing. Now other people are seeing them too, and there's no version of this where they can convince an entire room that everyone else's eyes are broken. One person maybe, two people maybe, if they work hard enough, but not everyone, not forever. The confusion they needed to survive needed you specifically, isolated and unsure. It was never built to survive a room full of people finally comparing what they actually remember. You used to wonder if you were imagining the pattern, if maybe you were the one being unfair by noticing it so precisely. That doubt was never an accident either. It was the last line of defense in the whole system, the part designed to make you distrust your own observation skills, even after you'd already caught the trick. You're reading too much into it, they'd say. And for a while, you believed them, because believing them was easier than accepting how deliberate the whole thing actually was. It wasn't too much. It was exactly enough. Enough to notice, enough to remember, enough to recognize the same tilted head, the same practiced certainty, showing up in front of someone else now, someone who isn't as willing to swallow it as you once had to be, back when you had no other choice. Number 3. Every lie needs a witness, and the witnesses started talking. A lie told once, to one person, in private, can survive almost indefinitely. Nobody's checking it against anything. But a lie told to a room, a lie told to a family, a lie repeated at dinners and group chats and long phone calls over the years, that lie needs an audience that stays quiet forever. And silence, real silence, the kind that never cracks, is a lot harder to guarantee than most manipulators realize. You remember the people who used to nod along, the ones who repeated their version because it was simpler than asking questions. Some of them believed it completely. Some of them just didn't want the discomfort of digging deeper. But belief built on convenience doesn't hold the same weight as belief built on evidence, and convenience has a way of collapsing the moment it stops being convenient. Something shifted. Maybe it was a conversation that got a little too specific. Maybe it was a moment where their story didn't line up with something a witness remembered clearly. Something small that used to feel unimportant, but suddenly mattered. Once one person says, "Wait, that's not actually how I remember it," permission spreads. Other people who stayed quiet for the same reasons start feeling safe enough to say the same thing. And a story that depended on unanimous silence doesn't survive the first crack in that silence. It cannot. It was never built to. Imagine a dam holding back a river, not because it's strong, but because every single piece of it is doing its exact job with no room for error. One piece gives, just slightly, just enough for a trickle to get through, and the trickle doesn't stay a trickle. Pressure finds every weak point once the first one opens, And it doesn't stop at polite. It doesn't stop until the whole structure gives way. You didn't cause any of this. You didn't call every person on their contact list and beg them to reconsider. You didn't need to. You just kept living, kept being consistent, kept being the same person in private that you were in public, while they were busy managing a dozen different versions of themselves for a dozen different audiences. Consistency doesn't need defending. It just needs time. And time is exactly what finally caught up with them. Think about how much discipline it takes to keep a room quiet for years. Every person in it has to keep choosing comfort over curiosity, over and over, every time a small doubt creeps in. That's an exhausting thing to maintain, even for people who aren't the one being lied to. Eventually, someone gets tired of managing their own discomfort more than they're afraid of asking an honest question, and the moment that happens, the room stops being quiet in the same way ever again. You never had to organize that shift. You never had to send a single message asking people to reconsider. You just kept existing as the same person you always were, and existing consistently for long enough is its own kind of proof, whether anyone ever says that out loud to your face or not. Number 4. The timeline they built finally stopped adding up in front of everyone. Here's something manipulators almost never account for. Timelines are unforgiving. You can bend a feeling. You can twist a tone. You can make someone doubt what an interaction meant. But dates, sequences, who said what and when, those things leave a shape. And shapes are hard to keep consistent across years of retelling, especially when the retelling is designed to make you look worse every time and them look better. You remember specific moments they rewrote. The night they claimed happened one way, when you know for a fact it happened another. The apology they say they gave that never actually came. The warning they insist they issued that you never once heard. For a long time, it was your word against theirs, and their confidence always seemed to win that particular contest. But confidence isn't proof. Confidence is just performance, and performance eventually meets a detail it can't explain away. Somewhere along the way, their story ran into a date it couldn't survive, a message that still exists somewhere. A person who remembers exactly where they were on a day that contradicts the version being told. A small, boring, unglamorous fact that doesn't care how convincingly it's argued against. Facts don't need an audience to be true. They just sit there, quietly, waiting for someone to notice them. Picture two maps of the same city, drawn by two different people, one accurate, one deliberately wrong, in a dozen small places to hide something. For years, only you were holding the accurate map, and you were told your map was the broken one. But now someone else pulled out a third map, an old receipt, an old message, an old memory that never changed. And suddenly, the wrong map doesn't line up with anything. Streets that were supposed to connect don't connect. Distances that were supposed to match don't match. And once people start noticing the map is wrong in one place, they stop trusting it everywhere else too. You were never the unreliable narrator in this story. You were just the only one who refused to keep redrawing the map to match a lie. That decision, quiet as it was, is the exact reason the whole thing is falling apart in front of them now. There's something almost poetic about a person who spent years rewriting your reality, finally getting caught by their own calendar. Not by a dramatic confrontation, not by a viral moment, just a date that doesn't line up, a detail that contradicts itself, sitting quietly in the middle of a story that was supposed to be airtight. That's usually how the truth actually wins, not with fireworks, but with a single fact refusing to move out of the way. And you spent years being told your memory was the unreliable one, while quietly, patiently, carrying the version of events that never once needed editing. That's not a coincidence. That's what happens when someone tells the truth from the start. They never have to remember which version they told to which person, because there was only ever one version to begin with. Number 5. The people they used to convince no longer believe them. There's a specific kind of silence that happens when someone realizes they were used as a tool in someone else's manipulation. It's not loud. It doesn't come with a dramatic confrontation. It comes with distance. A slower reply, a shorter conversation, an invitation that quietly stops coming. You've probably already noticed it happening to them, even if you haven't said a word about it. For years, they needed an audience that believed the version of you they were selling. The story where you were difficult, dramatic, too sensitive, impossible to please. And people believed it, because why wouldn't they? It was said with such certainty, such practiced concern, that it never occurred to most of them to question it. That's how convincing manipulation works. It doesn't look like manipulation. It looks like someone patiently explaining a situation they clearly understand better than you do. But belief, built on someone else's word, only holds as long as that word keeps matching reality. And once people start noticing gaps, once a story doesn't line up with something they witnessed directly, the questions start quietly forming in the back of their mind, even if they never say them out loud right away. Why did they need to bring that up again? Why does the story change slightly every time they tell it? Why does the person they were warned about seem so much calmer than the person doing all the warning? Imagine someone who spent years selling a product that quietly stopped working the way it was promised to. For a while, the reputation carries it. People keep buying based on the old trust. But eventually, enough people compare notes, and the reputation stops protecting the product. That's what's happening to their credibility right now. It isn't collapsing because you tore it down. It's collapsing because it was resting on a foundation that couldn't survive scrutiny, and scrutiny finally showed up. You don't have to convince a single one of these people of anything. You never did. All you had to do was keep being exactly who you always were, consistent, calm, unchanged by their version of you, and let time do what time always does to stories that were never true in the first place. You can almost track the exact moment belief starts to crack in someone else, because it looks so familiar. It looks like the version of you from years ago, the one who used to make excuses for the same behavior, the one who used to say, "Maybe I'm misunderstanding," instead of trusting what was right in front of you. Watching someone else walk that same road, at their own pace, without you having to drag them down it, is one of the strangest kinds of vindication there is. Quiet, unforced, entirely on its own timeline. You don't get to control how fast that happens for other people, and honestly, you don't need to. Their disbelief isn't your responsibility to manage or accelerate. It's simply the natural outcome of enough time passing next to a story that was never sturdy enough to hold. Number 6. Their charm stopped working the moment someone checked the facts. Charm is a powerful tool, and manipulators know exactly how to use it. It buys time, it buys forgiveness, it buys the benefit of the doubt in moments where the actual facts would never survive on their own. For years, their charm did more work than their honesty ever had to. A warm laugh here, a perfectly timed apology there, just enough softness to make people forget to ask the harder questions. But charm has a weakness nobody likes to talk about. It only works on people who haven't yet compared the performance to the pattern. The first time someone meets them, charm can carry the whole interaction. The 10th time, if that person has started noticing a gap between what's said and what's true, charm starts reading differently. It starts looking less like warmth and more like a technique. And once someone sees a technique for what it is, it stops working on them the same way ever again. You know this because you lived through it. You remember the exact moment their charm stopped landing on you, the moment you realized the warmth was conditional, the moment you started noticing it appeared strongest right after something needed covering up. That recognition didn't happen overnight. It took years of pattern before your instincts caught up to what your gut already knew. And now, that same recognition is happening in other people, one at a time, at their own pace, on their own timeline, and there's nothing anyone can do to speed that process up or stop it once it starts. Picture a coat of fresh paint over a wall with real damage underneath. From a distance, in the right lighting, it looks completely fine, but paint doesn't fix what's actually wrong with the wall, and eventually, with enough time, enough weather, enough people leaning on it, expecting it to hold, the damage underneath starts showing through again. That's charm without honesty underneath it. It looks fine until something puts real weight on it, and then it doesn't hold at all. They're finding that out right now, in real time, in front of people who used to hang on every word they said. And you already knew this chapter was coming, because you lived through the first draft of it years before anyone else got to see it. They're just so easygoing. I don't get what the problem was, someone might say now, meeting you for the first time, with no story attached, no warning label, no character built in advance. And that sentence, small as it sounds, is doing more damage to years of manufactured narrative than any argument you could have made on your own behalf. Reality, given a fair chance to speak for itself, tends to be a lot more convincing than performance ever was. You were never the hard person to get along with. You were the person who stopped performing agreement with things that weren't true, which is a very different thing, and it only ever looked difficult to people who needed your silence more than they needed your honesty. Number 7. The version of you they built was never real, and it's finally collapsing. For years, they didn't just lie about events. They built an entire version of you that never existed, and they sold that version to anyone who would listen. The difficult one, the dramatic one, the one who couldn't be pleased no matter how hard everyone tried. It wasn't just an exaggeration, it was a full character, constructed carefully, maintained consistently, and used specifically to explain away their own behavior every single time it got questioned. Here's the part that stings the most when you look back on it. You spent real energy trying to disprove a character that was never based on the truth to begin with. You tried to be calmer, quieter, more agreeable, more understanding, thinking that if you just adjusted yourself enough, the story about you would finally change. But it was never going to change, because the character wasn't built from your actual behavior. It was built from their need to have someone to blame. That's the exhausting trap of being gaslit for years. You're not just defending your memory of specific events. You're defending your entire identity against a fictional version of yourself that someone else invented and handed out to everyone around you. And no amount of good behavior fixes a character that was never based on real behavior in the first place. But characters, unlike people, can't hold up under real observation for very long. The moment someone actually spends time with you, actually watches how you handle conflict, actually sees your patience in situations that would break most people, the character starts falling apart on its own. They didn't have to defend you, they just had to exist in front of people long enough for reality to contradict the fiction. Imagine a portrait painted entirely from second-hand descriptions, never once compared to the actual person it's supposed to represent. For years it hangs there, and everyone assumes it's accurate simply because nobody's seen the real thing standing next to it. Then one day the real person walks into the room, and the portrait doesn't just look inaccurate, it looks almost embarrassing next to the truth. That's what's happening now. You didn't repaint anything. You just showed up as yourself long enough for people to notice the difference. It's a strange thing, grieving a version of yourself that never actually existed, except in someone else's retelling. You're allowed to feel that, the tiredness of having defended a person you never actually were, for years longer than you should have had to. But you're also allowed to notice, right now, that the character is finally being retired. not because you fought hardest to erase it, but because it simply couldn't survive being compared to the real thing for long enough. That's the quiet relief nobody warns you about. You don't have to keep correcting the record anymore. The record is correcting itself, slowly, the way true things always do, once they're given room to breathe next to the version that was never true. Number 8. Your silence wasn't confusion. It was evidence collecting itself in real time. They mistook your quiet for surrender. That was their first real miscalculation. When you stopped arguing every point, that stopped defending every detail, stopped exhausting yourself trying to convince people who had already decided not to listen, they read that as you finally accepting their version. What they didn't understand is that silence, when it's chosen instead of forced, is not the same thing as agreement. It's observation. And observation, over enough time, becomes something much more solid than any argument ever could. While you stayed quiet, you weren't disappearing. You were watching. You were noticing which stories changed and which ones stayed the same. You were noticing who defended you quietly, even when they wouldn't say it publicly. You were noticing the small contradictions that most people were too distracted to catch, because you had years of practice catching them, whether you wanted that practice or not. That's not weakness. That's a skill you built out of necessity, and skills like that don't disappear once you stop needing them for survival. They stay sharp. Here's what they never accounted for. A person who has been gaslit for years develops something most people never have to build, an almost forensic memory for inconsistency. You learn to notice the smallest gaps because your entire sense of reality depended on catching them. That skill didn't leave you when you stopped fighting out loud. It just went quiet. The same way a lighthouse doesn't stop working just because the storm hasn't hit yet. Imagine someone standing perfectly still in a room full of people rushing around, trying to keep their stories straight, not saying a word, just watching who trips over their own version of events. That stillness isn't passivity. It's the calm of someone who already knows exactly how this ends, because they've watched the same pattern play out enough times to recognize it before anyone else in the room does. That was you, this whole time, and it still is. There's a particular kind of exhaustion in being the only person in a room who remembers something correctly. It's not dramatic. Nobody sees it happening. It just sits in your chest quietly, year after year, while you keep choosing not to argue about something you already know is true, because arguing never seemed to change anything anyway. That exhaustion was never wasted energy, even when it felt like it. It was the exact discipline that kept your version of events intact long enough for it to matter. You didn't need anyone's applause for staying steady through that. You just needed to keep being accurate, quietly, consistently, for as long as it took. And it turns out that's exactly what the truth needed from you the whole time. Number 9. Someone with real credibility finally said the words, "That's not what happened." There's a specific kind of shift that occurs when the person contradicting the lie is no longer just you. For years, your voice alone wasn't enough. Not because you weren't telling the truth, but because they had already convinced people your voice couldn't be trusted. That's the cruelest part of the whole system. It doesn't just silence you, it preemptively discredits you before you even open your mouth. But something changes completely when someone else, someone with actual credibility in that circle, someone who wasn't personally involved in the original conflict, looks at the same situation and says the exact same thing you'd been saying for years. Suddenly, it's not your side of the story anymore. It's just the truth, being confirmed by someone who has nothing to gain by saying it and no personal stake in defending you specifically. That's the moment the entire dynamic flips. Because when a neutral voice says, "Wait, that doesn't sound right," people listen differently than when the person directly affected says it. Not because your truth was ever smaller than theirs, because manipulators specifically design their story to make your voice sound biased and everyone else's sound objective. Once an objective voice lands on your side of reality, the whole structure they built to discredit you starts losing its grip. Picture a courtroom where the only testimony available for years was the accused explaining their own innocence directly to the jury, over and over, in increasingly confident tones. Then one day, an independent witness who has no reason to lie takes the stand and describes the exact same events you'd been describing the entire time. The jury doesn't hear a new story. They hear confirmation of the story that was always true, finally validated by someone they have no reason to distrust. You didn't need that validation to know you were right. You knew it the whole time. But watching it land in front of people who spent years doubting you, that's not about your ego. That's about the truth finally standing in a room it was locked out of for far too long. Notice something important here. This isn't about needing an authority figure to rescue you or validate your worth, because your worth was never actually in question to begin with. It's simply about what happens, practically and predictably, when a story finally gets tested by someone who has no personal investment in protecting it. Objectivity doesn't owe you anything, and it doesn't owe them anything either. It just reports what it sees, and for years, what it would have seen was always on your side. That's why this particular shift lands so differently than any argument you ever tried to make yourself. It was never about volume. It was about the story finally being looked at by someone with nothing to lose either way. And nothing to lose is exactly the condition under which the truth tends to hold up best. Number 10. The friends who defended them are starting to go quiet. Loyalty built on a lie is fragile. In a way, loyalty built on truth never is. For years, some of the people around them defended their version of events loudly, confidently, almost proudly, as if standing up for them made them a good friend. And maybe, from where they stood, it felt that way. Nobody defends someone they believe is lying. They defend someone they believe is telling the truth. But defenses built on incomplete information don't survive complete information very well. As the gaps in the story start showing, as the timeline stops matching, as the character they painted of you keeps failing to match the actual person standing in front of them, those loud defenders start getting quieter. Not because they're being cruel, because they're realizing, slowly and uncomfortably, that they spent years standing behind a version of events that wasn't accurate. And that realization is not a comfortable one to sit with. You've probably already noticed the shift. The group chats that used to be full of energy defending them now feel a little more careful. The invitations that used to come easily now come with a little more hesitation. The people who used to repeat their stories without question now change the subject a little faster when your name comes up. That discomfort isn't random. That's the exact discomfort of someone quietly reconsidering years of loyalty they built on a version of you that was never true. Imagine a crowd cheering loudly for a performer, completely certain of the show, right up until the trick fails in front of everyone and the applause just stops, mid-motion, hands frozen halfway together, nobody quite sure what to do with themselves. That's the silence spreading through their circle right now. Not hostility, just the awkward, unmistakable sound of people realizing they clapped for something they shouldn't have. You might feel a strange pull to reach out to some of these people now, to say, "I told you," or to finally get the acknowledgement you were owed for years. You don't owe anyone that conversation, and you're allowed to decide, on your own terms, whether it's even worth having. Some bridges are worth quietly rebuilding once someone shows real understanding of what happened. Others were never sturdy enough to hold real honesty in the first place, and it's all right to simply let those stay exactly where they are. Either way, their quiet isn't a debt you're required to collect on. It's simply confirmation of something you already knew was true, arriving late. in its own time, the way most honest realizations eventually do. Number 11. The apology that never came, and why it stopped mattering. For a long time, you probably imagined the moment they'd finally admit it. The moment they'd sit across from you and say the words you'd been waiting years to hear, "I was wrong, and I knew it the entire time." You pictured what it would feel like. The relief, the vindication, the closing of a chapter that had been open far too long. And chosen one, that apology may never come. Not the way you imagined it, not in the shape you wanted it. Here's the truth that's easier to accept once you stop waiting for it. People who build entire versions of reality to avoid accountability rarely find the courage to demolish that same reality out loud, even when it's already collapsing around them. They might apologize for something small, something safe, something that costs them very little, just to look like they're taking responsibility while the bigger truth stays buried. That's not honesty, that's damage control, and it's important you can tell the difference. But here's what actually matters more than any apology ever could. You don't need their confession to know what happened. You were there. You lived it. And now, slowly, other people are starting to see the same pattern you saw years ago, without needing their permission to believe it. The apology was never the thing that was going to heal you. The truth being visible to more than just you, that's the thing that was actually healing you this whole time, whether they ever say a single word about it or not. Picture waiting years for someone to hand you a key to a door you've already learned how to open yourself. At some point, the key stops mattering, because you're already standing on the other side of it, living your life, while they're still standing in the hallway pretending the door was never locked in the first place. Let go of the version of closure you were promised by every story that ever told you the villain has to kneel before the credits roll. Real closure rarely looks that clean. Sometimes it looks like simply not needing their words anymore, because the ground underneath you finally feels solid without them. That's not settling. That's actually rarer and sturdier than any apology could have been, because it doesn't depend on them ever choosing to be honest with you. You get to close this chapter on your own terms, with or without their confession. And chosen one, that decision was always yours to make, whether they ever understood that or not. Number 12. Watching them scramble to rewrite the story in real time, and failing. There's a particular kind of desperation that shows up when someone realizes their story is falling apart faster than they can patch it. You've probably already noticed it starting. The sudden extra details added to old stories that never used to need explaining. The new context, suddenly remembered years later, conveniently timed right after someone started asking questions. The tone shifting from confident certainty to careful, overly detailed justification. The kind of explaining only people with something to hide actually do. Confident lies don't need constant editing. They stay the same, told the same way, every single time, because there's nothing underneath them that needs protecting. But a lie under pressure starts changing shape. It adds details it never had before. It shifts blame slightly differently, depending on who's listening. It starts contradicting its own earlier versions, sometimes within the same conversation, because keeping a false story consistent under real scrutiny takes a kind of precision that's almost impossible to maintain once people are actually paying attention. You're watching this happen in real time, even if you're not directly involved in every conversation. Word travels. Someone mentions the newest version of the story, and it doesn't quite match what you remember them saying just a few months ago. Someone notices the sudden new detail that conveniently explains away the one part of the story that never made sense. It's not subtle once you know what you're looking at, and you know exactly what you're looking at, because you spent years learning to recognize it before anyone else did. Picture someone trying to hold together a cracking dam with their bare hands, plugging one leak just as another one opens somewhere else, moving faster and faster, more and more desperate, while the pressure behind the dam keeps building regardless of how hard they work to stop it. That's what rewriting a collapsing lie looks like from the outside. Frantic, exhausting, and ultimately no match for the truth that's already found its way through. There's something almost uncomfortable about watching someone panic in real time, even someone who hurt you for years. You might catch yourself feeling an unexpected flicker of sympathy in the middle of all this, and that's all right too. You don't have to perform coldness to prove the truth mattered. You're allowed to simply notice the scramble, register what it means, and keep walking without needing to feel anything more dramatic than quiet, steady relief. That's the version of this story that actually fits who you are. Not gloating, not celebration for its own sake, just the calm recognition that the thing you knew all along is now visible to everyone else too, exactly the way it always should have been. Number 13. Their own words are now the evidence they can't take back. Every message they sent, every voicemail they left, every conversation they had with someone who happened to remember it clearly, none of that disappeared just because the moment passed. Words have a strange permanence, even when they're spoken instead of written, even when years go by afterward. Someone remembers. Someone kept a screenshot they forgot about. Someone has a message thread that still exists exactly the way it was typed, contradicting a story they've since rewritten a dozen different ways. You've probably felt the specific discomfort of hearing your own memory questioned by someone who was actively lying, while proof of the truth sat quietly somewhere, waiting. That's one of the cruelest parts of this whole dynamic. The truth doesn't disappear just because it's inconvenient. It just waits, patiently, for the moment it becomes relevant again, and that moment always arrives eventually, whether anyone expects it to or not. What's happening now is exactly that moment. Old messages resurfacing in conversations they didn't see coming. Old promises being compared to broken outcomes they thought nobody would remember. Old timelines being laid next to new versions and simply not matching, no matter how confidently the new version is delivered. They can't argue with their own handwriting. They can't argue with their own voice on an old voicemail. They can't argue with a memory someone else has been quietly holding on to the exact same way you held on to yours. Picture a person who spent years writing checks they assumed would never be cashed, confident nobody was keeping the receipts, confident the paper trail would just fade into nothing over time. And then, all at once, every single one of those checks lands on the same desk on the same day, and there's no version of events left that can explain away that many signatures in that many places. That's what's arriving for them right now, and none of it required you to lift a single finger. None of this required a strategist on your side, a plan, or a single confrontation you had to script out in advance. It only required time, the same time they thought was working in their favor, quietly working against them instead, one small forgotten detail at a time. That's usually how the truth moves. Not fast, not loud, just patient, in a way most people underestimate until they're standing in the middle of exactly this moment. You get to watch this part unfold from a distance now, not because you're avoiding it, but because you already did the difficult work of surviving it up close for years. Distance, at this stage, isn't detachment. It's simply what peace looks like once the fight isn't yours to carry anymore. Number 14. This was never about revenge. It was always about balance. It's worth being honest about something here, chosen one, because this genuinely matters. What's happening to them isn't happening because you wished hard enough for it, and it isn't a reason to celebrate someone else's pain for its own sake. What's happening is simply the natural result of years of dishonesty finally meeting years of quiet, consistent truth. That's not cruelty, that's balance. And balance doesn't need your permission or your applause to arrive. It just arrives, on its own timeline, in its own way. You don't need to chase this. You don't need to fan the flames, share every update, or make sure everyone knows exactly what's happening to them right now. The truth doesn't need a hype squad to be real. It's already doing exactly what it needed to do, in its own time, without your help. And honestly, without your help is exactly how it should happen. Your job was never to destroy them. Your job was to survive being doubted for years without losing yourself in the process. And you already did that. Everything happening now is simply the world catching up to a reality you've been standing inside of for a very long time. This is also a good moment to say clearly, if what you went through sounds like this, if someone spent years making you doubt your own memory, your own perception, your own sense of what's real, that's worth taking seriously and talking through with someone you trust, whether that's a therapist, a counselor, or simply people in your life who see you clearly. You don't have to carry the untangling of it alone, and there's no shame in wanting support while you rebuild trust in your own mind. Picture a scale that's been tipped unfairly for years, held down on one side by a hand nobody else could see. The moment that hand finally lets go, the scale doesn't need anyone pushing it back into place. It just returns to balance on its own, because that was always its natural state to begin with. That's what's happening here. Nothing forced, nothing manufactured. Just gravity, doing exactly what gravity always does, once the thing holding it back finally lets go. If any part of this felt uncomfortably close to your own story, that discomfort is worth paying attention to, gently and without judgment toward yourself. Rebuilding trust in your own memory after someone spent years chipping away at it isn't something you have to figure out alone in silence. And reaching out for real support isn't a sign that you weren't strong enough to handle it. It's simply part of getting the rest of your peace back, on your own timeline, with people who are actually equipped to help you carry it. Balance showing up in their life doesn't replace that work, and it was never supposed to. It just confirms, quietly and undeniably, that the version of reality you protected for so long was the real one all along. Number 15. What comes next belongs entirely to you. Here's where this story actually ends, chosen one, not with their downfall, because that was never really the point, but with you standing on the other side of years you weren't sure you'd survive, with your sense of reality intact. You did survive it. You held on to the truth, even when you were the only one who believed it. You stayed consistent, even when consistency felt exhausting and pointless and unseen. And now, slowly, in ways you don't have to force or manage or defend, the world is simply seeing what you always saw. Whatever happens to them next isn't really your responsibility to track. Their unraveling was never going to be the thing that healed you, even though watching it might feel like a strange kind of relief. The real healing already happened quietly, over years, every time you chose to trust your own memory a little more than the story you were being told to accept instead. That's the actual victory here, not their downfall, your return to yourself. You get to walk forward now without spending your energy convincing anyone of anything. You get to stop auditioning for belief. You get to simply exist, consistent and clear, and let that consistency speak for itself, the way it's already been quietly speaking for years, whether anyone was listening yet or not. The fog they built around your own mind is lifting, not because they finally admitted anything, but because you never stopped being exactly who you always were underneath it. So let them handle what's left of the story they built. Let them explain the inconsistencies to people who are finally asking the right questions. That's their unraveling to manage now, not yours. You already did the hardest part years ago, when you kept believing your own eyes, even when the whole room was telling you not to. Everything from here is simply the truth finishing what you already started. Somewhere down the road, this will feel like a smaller chapter than it does right now. That's not a promise meant to rush you past what you've lived through. It's simply what tends to happen once the fog actually lifts. Once you're standing far enough on the other side of it to see how much space it used to take up, and how much lighter you feel now that it doesn't. You spent years being told your own reality wasn't trustworthy. From here forward, you get to trust it completely, not because someone finally gave you permission, but because you never actually needed it in the first place. If this message landed somewhere real tonight, let it know. Drop 77 in the comments one more time before you go, and if you want to help this reach the next person who needs exactly this message at exactly the right moment, share it, like it, and subscribe so it finds them too. Thank you for being here, chosen one. We'll see you in the next one. Take care and goodbye.